What if everything you are, every thought in your mind, every breath in your lungs, every person you have ever known, exists only because a tiny group of ancient humans survived one of the darkest moments in the history of our species? Right now, there are more than 8 billion people on Earth. Cities glow through the night from space. Planes cross the sky every minute. Entire nations move in synchronized rhythms powered by billions of individual human lives. Humanity seems unstoppable, but hidden deep inside your DNA is evidence that this was almost never the case. Long before empires, before agriculture, before language as we know it, humanity came terrifyingly close to disappearing forever. Scientists now believe that around 900,000 years ago, our ancestors were pushed to the edge of extinction. The human breeding population may have collapsed to just 1,280 individuals, not 1,280 in one region. Not 1,280 tribes, just 1,280 humans in total, scattered across the earth. That means every human alive today may be descended from a group so small that it could fit inside a modern movie theater. And the most chilling part, this was not a short disaster. Humanity remained trapped in this genetic bottleneck for around 117,000 years, for over 100 millennia. Our ancestors lived on the edge of total extinction, one disease, one drought, one failed generation, and humanity would have vanished. No civilizations, no pyramids, no written history, no science, no music, no art, no cities, no us, and yet somehow, against impossible odds, they survived. The question is why humanity nearly disappeared in the first place, and how that tiny remnant endured long enough to become everyone alive today, because the answer may reveal the most important survival story ever written. And it was hidden inside us all along. For most of human history, we assumed that the rise of humanity was a gradual ascent. The story seems simple. Primitive ancestors evolved in Africa. Populations slowly expanded, intelligence increased, and eventually modern humans emerged. But the deeper scientists looked into our genetic history, the stranger that story became. Compared with many other species, humans have surprisingly low genetic diversity. At first glance, that might not sound important, but genetic diversity is one of the strongest indicators of a species' historical population size. Large populations tend to preserve many genetic variations over time. Small populations lose them. If millions of humans had existed continuously for hundreds of thousands of years, our DNA should show a rich record of variation, but it does and single quotes t. Instead, the human genome carries signs of an enormous contraction. It is as if humanity passed through an evolutionary funnel so narrow that almost all genetic diversity was stripped away. For decades, scientists suspected that some kind of ancient bottleneck had happened, but they had no idea when. Then researchers developed a powerful analytical model capable of reading hidden demographic patterns in modern DNA. By studying genetic sequences from populations around the world, they could estimate how ancestral human populations changed over immense periods of time. What they found was astonishing. Roughly 900,000 years ago, the ancestral population of humans crashed dramatically. According to the data, the effective breeding population dropped by nearly 99%. Imagine the entire human line reduced to a fragile remnant, barely able to sustain itself. That tiny surviving group carried the future of the species. Every branch of humanity alive today emerged from them. This was not just a difficult period. It was the closest humanity may ever have come to extinction. And until recently, we never knew it happened. The evidence was not found in fossils. It was not discovered in ancient tools. It was not buried beneath the earth. It was hidden in the DNA of every living person. This changed the entire narrative of human origins, because instead of a smooth evolutionary rise, Our ancestors endured a catastrophic collapse. Something happened on Earth so devastating that nearly the entire human population disappeared, and for more than 100,000 years. Humanity remained critically endangered. This raises a terrifying question. What could possibly reduce our ancestors to only 1,280 individuals and keep them there for 117,000 years? To answer that, we have to travel back to a world almost unrecognizable from our own, 900,000 years ago. Earth was entering one of the most unstable climatic periods in human prehistory. The planet was changing violently. Temperatures dropped, rainfall patterns shifted, glacial cycles intensified, landscapes transformed over generations. This period, known as the early Middle Pleistocene transition, was a time when Earth's climate rhythms began changing in dramatic ways. Ice ages became longer and harsher. Dry periods became more extreme. Habitats that once supported early humans began collapsing. Forests receded. Grasslands dried out. Water became scarce. Food sources vanished. The ancestors of humanity, already vulnerable, suddenly faced environmental chaos on a planetary scale. Imagine living in a world where familiar rivers dry up over generations, where grazing animals disappear. Where forests become barren, where the climate itself turns against survival. Early humans depended completely on ecosystems for food, water, and shelter. They had no agriculture. No permanent settlements. No stored reserves. No technology to shield them from prolonged environmental stress. When the environment failed, survival failed. Even a slight drop in rainfall could destroy food chains. A prolonged drought could wipe out regional populations. And if multiple climate shocks struck in succession, the results would be catastrophic. Scientists believe this is exactly what happened. Massive climatic instability likely fragmented early human groups into isolated pockets. Populations became trapped in shrinking habitable zones. Separated groups lost contact. Many died out completely, and the survivors may have been concentrated in only a few refuges where conditions remained barely survivable. The world that had once allowed human ancestors to expand suddenly became hostile. The human population crashed, and once it crashed, recovery was painfully slow because surviving in small numbers creates a new set of dangers. When populations fall to low, extinction becomes self-reinforcing. There are fewer mates, less genetic diversity, greater vulnerability to disease. Greater risk from random disasters. Even if food returns, the population may still fail to recover. This creates what biologists call an extinction vortex. The smaller the population becomes, the harder survival gets for humanity. This vortex may have lasted over 100,000 years. Generation after generation lived in an evolutionary emergency. And yet they did not vanish. That is what makes this event so extraordinary. Humanity should have disappeared, but it didn't. Somehow that tiny surviving population endured conditions severe enough to erase nearly everyone else. And in doing so, they may have changed what humanity would become, because sometimes the greatest threats do more than reduce numbers. They reshape evolution itself. When a species is pushed to the brink of extinction, survival is no longer random. The environment begins selecting for the traits most capable of enduring extreme pressure. Only the most adaptable survive. Only the most resilient reproduce. Only the most cooperative endure. This means that the 117,000-year bottleneck may have been one of the most important evolutionary crucibles in human history. It did not just threaten humanity. It may have forged humanity. Scientists suspect that during this prolonged crisis, intense survival pressures accelerated major evolutionary changes. Groups that could cooperate more effectively had better odds of survival. Individuals with greater intelligence could adapt to changing environments. Those capable of innovation, better tools, better communication, Better planning would have an enormous advantage under relentless pressure. These traits become essential. The bottleneck may have rewarded problem solving, social cohesion, and adaptability. In other words, the same disaster that nearly erased humanity may have selected for the very qualities that define us today. This is one of the most profound possibilities. In all of anthropology, the traits we see as uniquely human may have emerged not during abundance, but during catastrophe. Imagine small groups struggling to survive in increasingly harsh landscapes. Food is scarce. Predators are everywhere. The weather is unpredictable. One mistake means death. Under these conditions, intelligence becomes survival. Communication becomes survival. Trust becomes survival. Social bonds become survival. Groups that share resources endure. Groups that coordinate survive. Groups that innovate persist over thousands of generations. This relentless filter may have shaped the human lineage, and there is another possibility even more astonishing. Some researchers suggest that this bottleneck period may align with key evolutionary transitions in the fossil record. Around this era, the lineages leading to later human species show signs of major anatomical and behavioral change. Brain size increased till use improved. Cognitive flexibility expanded. The foundations of humanity as we know it may have emerged from this crucible. If that is true, then humanity was not merely saved by the bottleneck. Humanity was transformed by it. Without this crisis, the species that emerged afterward might have been fundamentally different minds, different capacities, different futures, possibly no modern humans at all. This means your intelligence, your emotional complexity, your capacity for culture, these may all be echoes of an ancient extinction event. The darkest chapter in human prehistory may have shaped every generation that followed. That possibility is both awe-inspiring and unsettling because it suggests that our greatest strengths may have been born from near annihilation. And yet, for all this insight, one mystery remains unsolved. If climate stress caused the collapse, why did the bottleneck last so long? Why didn't humanity recover sooner? What kept our ancestors trapped at the edge of extinction for over 100,000 years? That question may hold the deepest mystery of all. A sudden disaster can cause a population collapse, but a collapse lasting 117,000 years suggests something far more severe. It suggests that Earth did not simply experience one catastrophic event. It suggests that the world remained hostile to human recovery for an extraordinary span of time. For perspective, 117,000 years is longer than the entire history of modern human civilization many times over. Agriculture began only about 12,000 years ago. Recorded history is roughly 5,000 years old. The Roman Empire lasted about 500 years. This bottleneck endured for over 100,000 years. That means thousands of generations lived and died in a fragile state where humanity remained perilously close to extinction. This was not a temporary crisis. It was an age of survival. So, what kept recovery from happening? One answer is recurring climate instability. Instead of one drought or one ice age, our ancestors may have faced repeated environmental collapses. Whenever populations began to grow, new climate disruptions may have pushed them back down. Rainfall patterns could shift, ecosystems could collapse, food sources could disappear. The survivors may have lived in isolated refuges where conditions were survivable but never ideal for expansion. Another possibility is competition. Early humans were not alone. Other hominin species existed during this period. Different human relatives may have competed for the same resources in shrinking habitats. Predators also posed constant threats with populations already tiny. Even minor competition could block recovery. Then there is disease. Small isolated populations are extremely vulnerable to epidemics. A disease outbreak in a group of only a few hundred individuals could wipe out entire lineages, and because genetic diversity was so low, resistance to disease may have been limited. Every recovery attempt could be crushed by environmental or biological shocks. The bottleneck became a trap. Humanity survived but barely. And perhaps the most haunting possibility is this: there may have been more than one near extinction. The 900,000-year bottleneck might represent a prolonged sequence of collapses, so severe that humanity hovered at the brink for millennia. Again and again, our ancestors may have come within inches of disappearing forever. Every living person is descended from the survivors of that endless sequence of close calls. That means human existence was not guaranteed. It was statistically improbable. The chain of survival was unbelievably fragile. A failed migration, a lost water source, a harsher winter, a single epidemic. Any one of these could have ended everything, but somehow they endured all of it. And that may be the greatest miracle in human history. If humanity really hovered on the edge of extinction for more than 100,000 years, then survival alone was not the only story unfolding. Something else was happening. While numbers remained low, while the species was fragile, while each generation fought merely to endure, the human line may have been changing in ways that would shape every person alive today. Because bottlenecks do more than reduce populations, they rewrite the future. When only a tiny fraction of a species survives, those survivors do not simply preserve the past, they determine what the future can become. Every genetic trait that remains in the population becomes disproportionately important. Every mutation carried by survivors becomes part of the species' foundation. Every lost lineage disappears forever. That means the ancient bottleneck did not just threaten humanity. It redefined humanity. Think about what that means. Before the collapse, the ancestral human population likely contained a much wider range of genetic diversity, different traits, different combinations, different evolutionary possibilities. But when the population crashed to around 1,280 breeding individuals, nearly all of that diversity vanished. Countless genetic branches ended forever. The survivors carried only a narrow slice of the total human genetic potential. And from that narrow slice, every later human population emerged. Every culture, every civilization, every language, every nation, every person. All descended from the DNA of that tiny surviving remnant. The implications are staggering because this means many aspects of who we are, our vulnerabilities, our strengths, even certain limits of our biology may be the result of that ancient narrowing. Humanity was filtered, and the version of humanity that survived became the only version that would ever exist. One of the most powerful consequences of a genetic bottleneck is the loss of diversity. At first, that sounds abstract, but genetic diversity is the raw material of resilience. The more variation a species has, the more adaptable it is to new challenges. Different individuals carry different strengths. Some resist disease, some adapt better to climate shifts, some survive environmental stress more effectively. When diversity is high, a species has more ways to survive, but when diversity collapses, the species becomes more uniform and more vulnerable. This is why endangered animals today often struggle even after their populations recover. Their numbers rise, but their lost diversity does not easily return. The same may be true for humanity. Although our numbers eventually exploded, our genetic diversity remained relatively low. Compared with many other mammals, humans are genetically remarkably similar. This may be one of the lasting scars of the bottleneck. We recovered in numbers, but not in diversity. The ancient collapse may still shape our biology today. Some scientists believe that certain inherited vulnerabilities in humans may be linked to these ancient population contractions. Reduced diversity can increase the persistence of harmful mutations. It can limit adaptability. It can leave species more vulnerable to future threats. In other words, humanity survived the bottleneck, but survival came at a cost. We carry the legacy of that survival in our genes. Every person alive today is part of that legacy. Your body is a product of an ancient genetic narrowing. Your existence is evidence of survival, but also of what was lost. Countless human possibilities disappeared in that collapse. We will never know what traits vanished. We will never know what alternate forms of humanity might have emerged. All we know is that the survivors defined the future. And we are that future. This ancient crisis may also explain something extraordinary about human evolution. Why did the human lineage eventually produce such unusual cognitive abilities? Why did our ancestors evolve extraordinary cooperation, symbolic thought, long-term planning, and social intelligence? These traits are not random, they are enormously expensive. Biologically, larger brains require more energy. Long childhoods, slow reproduction. Complex social systems demand stability. So why did evolution favor such costly adaptations? Because under extreme survival pressure, intelligence becomes one of the most powerful survival tools imaginable. When environments become unpredictable, strength is not enough. Speed is not enough. Instinct is not enough. Adaptability becomes everything. And intelligence is adaptability. A species that can solve problems, cooperate, plan ahead, and innovate can survive challenges that would destroy less flexible species. This may be what happened during the bottleneck. As climates shifted and habitats collapsed, groups that could adapt behaviorally survived better than those relying only on physical adaptation. Those who could communicate effectively had advantages. Those who could coordinate hunts had advantages. Those who could share resources had advantages. Those who could remember seasonal patterns had advantages. Those who could innovate had advantages over thousands of generations. These pressures may have selected for enhanced cognition. The bottleneck may have accelerated the emergence of the social intelligence that later defined humanity. If this is true, then some of our most human traits may have been forged in the harshest era of our existence: the ability to cooperate, the ability to imagine, the ability to plan, the ability to care for one another. These may be evolutionary responses to prolonged existential threat. That means our intelligence may be a survival adaptation born from near extinction. The very qualities that built civilizations may have emerged because our ancestors were pushed to the edge. That changes how we see human evolution. Progress was not smooth. It was not inevitable. It may have been born in crisis. And that makes the survival of our species even more astonishing, because humanity did not rise despite catastrophe. Humanity may have risen because of it. But this ancient story is not just about the past. It is about the present, because the bottleneck reveals something deeply uncomfortable about human existence. Our species is far more fragile than we like to believe. Today, humanity dominates the planet. We build megacities, we alter climates, we reshape ecosystems, we have technology capable of changing the Earth itself. It is easy to believe we are secure. But 900,000 years ago, humanity was nearly erased, not by war, not by advanced predators, not by some cosmic event, but by environmental instability, climate shifts, resource collapse, population fragmentation. The same forces that nearly ended humanity once still exist. The difference is scale. Today, our numbers are vast, but our systems are deeply interconnected. Food supply chains span continents, energy systems depend on global networks, water systems sustain billions. Modern civilization appears strong, but complexity creates vulnerability. The lesson of the bottleneck is not that humanity is weak. It is that survival depends on resilience, and resilience depends on adaptability. That ancient population of 1,280 survived because it adapted. because it endured, because it cooperated. Those same principles determine survival now. The bottleneck reminds us that existence is never guaranteed. Species survive until conditions overwhelm them. Humanity escaped once, but the forces capable of causing collapse never disappeared. This realization is humbling because it means that beneath the illusion of permanence, we remain part of nature's fragile balance. Our ancestors learned that lesson in the harshest possible way. Their survival gave us the chance to exist. What we do with that inheritance is now our responsibility. There is another haunting dimension to this story. If humanity came so close to extinction once, how many times did we almost vanish without knowing? The fossil record is incomplete. Ancient populations disappeared without leaving clear evidence. Whole branches of humanity rose and vanished. Genetic traces eroded. History was erased long before history existed. That means the 900,000-year bottleneck may not have been the only near extinction. It may simply be the one we can detect. The ancestors of humanity may have faced repeated existential crises. Droughts. Volcanic winters. Predator pressures, disease outbreaks, environmental collapse, each one narrowing the path toward the future. Each one testing whether humanity would continue. This means our existence may be the result of countless survival thresholds. Again and again, the species may have hovered near the brink. Again and again, survival depended on impossibly fragile margins. The odds of making it through one such event are low. The odds of surviving many are extraordinary. And yet here we are. Every human alive is the result of an unbroken chain of survival stretching back through every bottleneck, every disaster, every close call. Your ancestors survived famine, they survived climate collapse, they survived disease, they survived extinction thresholds. Every generation that failed disappeared, every generation that survived passed the future forward, and eventually that future became you. This perspective transforms the meaning of existence because your life is not simply the product of biological reproduction. It is the result of an ancient victory against impossible odds. The probability of your existence is unimaginably small. Not in the poetic sense. In the literal evolutionary sense, humanity should not have survived as many times as it did, and yet it did. That survival is written in your DNA. The code inside every cell in your body carries the evidence. You are alive because the human story did not end. And for 117,000 years, it nearly did. Perhaps the most emotional truth in this entire story is this: every person alive today is connected by that ancient survival. The divisions that dominate modern life, nation, language, ethnicity, ideology, are recent. The bottleneck happened before all of them. Before borders, before cultures, before civilizations. At that moment, humanity was one fragile lineage, one endangered species, one small population trying not to disappear. That means all humans share the descendants of that survival group. The genetic distance between us is tiny compared with the scale of that shared history. In the deepest sense, we are the descendants of the same survivors. This is not metaphor. It is biological reality. The bottleneck reminds us that humanity is one family shaped by one extraordinary struggle. Every war, every division, every boundary emerged after that, but before all of it, there was survival. There was a small human population refusing to vanish. And every person on Earth is the continuation of that refusal. That realization changes the scale of human identity. It places our differences inside a much larger story, a story of fragility, a story of endurance, a story of improbable survival. This may be the most powerful message hidden inside the DNA evidence. Humanity's greatest common heritage is not civilization. It is survival, and survival was never guaranteed. When scientists first uncovered the signs of the ancient bottleneck, they were looking for demographic patterns, population sizes, genetic diversity, evolutionary timelines, but what they found was more than data. They found evidence of one of the most extraordinary survival stories in the history of life. a story in which humanity was nearly erased, a story in which the future of our species rested in the survival of a tiny scattered population, a story in which the existence of every person alive depended on the endurance of approximately 1,280 ancestors. The scale of that fragility is almost impossible to comprehend. Everything humanity has ever created, every work of art, every scientific breakthrough, every act of love, every city, every discovery balanced on the survival of that ancient remnant. If they had failed, the human story would have ended before it truly began. No one would know. No one would remember. There would be no memory of our extinction. The world would simply move on without us. That may be the most unsettling realization of all. Existence feels inevitable from the inside, but history says otherwise. Humanity was not inevitable. It was improbable. Our presence on Earth is the outcome of survival against overwhelming odds, and perhaps that is what makes human existence so extraordinary. Not that we became powerful. Not that we built civilizations, but that we survived long enough to do so. The ancient DNA hidden inside us reveals a truth both terrifying and beautiful. We are the descendants of those who refuse to disappear, and every breath we take is proof that, against all odds, they succeeded.